Hello, America. I'm Mark Levin, and this is Life, Liberty, and Levin. We have a great guest, Ted Cruz. How are you, Senator?
Mark, I'm doing terrific. How are you doing tonight?
I'm doing very, very well. We've got a number of important issues I want to discuss with you, and you're the perfect person to discuss this with. First of all, you have a great new book out called One Vote Away, How a Single Supreme Court Seat Can Change History. Did you coordinate this with the court or the president to have your book come out at a time like this?
Well, it was a bit of serendipity. I wrote the book this spring and summer during COVID lockdown, just sitting in my living room on my laptop. And obviously I knew the election was coming up in November, but I had no idea that we would have a Supreme Court vacancy in the month of October. The book just came out this week, and so the two coincided. Really a perfect storm. I will say this, Mark, I'm just glad I didn't write a book on thermonuclear war. That would have been a much worse outcome.
All right, let's jump right into this. This is a hot campaign issue. It's a hot issue in the United States Senate. It's a hot issue from sea to shining sea. Amy Coney Barrett has been nominated. She's been on the Seventh Circuit briefly. She taught as a professor at Notre Dame Law School. She's got 7 children, 2 adopted from Haiti, 1 special needs. Her husband is an attorney too, so she's a mother. She is an accomplished professor. She's an accomplished federal judge. And she's under brutal and vicious attack by the Democrats who are attacking her Catholicism. We even have some of the race baiters out there attacking the fact that she adopted 2 Haitian children. Why the hate? Why the attacks? And why do the Democrats conduct themselves this way when there's a Supreme Court vacancy?
Well, it's twisted and deranged, and they're coming after her hard. They're coming after her family. And I think it's going to get worse. I mean, sadly, this is a pattern we've seen. It really started with the confirmation hearing of Robert Bork. And when Bork was nominated in 87, I think were you at DOJ in 87 for the Bork fight?
Yes, we were there.
It was the Democrats, Joe Biden, Ted Kennedy. They decided to declare war, and they went after, and they didn't. Bork was one of the most accomplished lawyers and judges in the history of our country. He'd been Solicitor General. He'd been a leading professor. By all measures, he's one of the most qualified nominees to the court ever. And that hearing featured, among other things, Ted Kennedy booming in Robert Bork's America. And he laid out this parade of horribles that ended up destroying destroying Bork so much so that his name became a verb. To Bork someone continues to this day, and it's the kind of personal, dishonest, deceitful attacks. We saw them replicated even uglier with Clarence Thomas and what the Democrats did to Clarence Thomas. At the time, Justice Thomas referred to it as a high-tech lynching, and it was. And Justice Thomas defended himself and made it through. We saw them do it again with Sam Alito, the same sort of personal, brutal, ugly attacks. I still remember Justice Alito's wife reduced to tears as the Democrats went into the gutter. And then just recently we saw it with Brett Kavanaugh. And there's a pattern. It's interesting, by the way, we don't do that to Democratic nominees. There's never been a Democratic nominee who's been borked. We'll engage with them on substance. We'll engage with them on issues. But the kind of slime and personal attack, for Brett Kavanaugh, he's got 2 young daughters. The agony and the pressure that was put on his family was really disgusting. And now with Judge Barrett, I sat down with Judge Barrett this week in the Capitol and visited with her. And one of the things I talked with her quite a bit about was how her kids were doing. 7 kids. We're already seeing Democratic operatives, as you mentioned, attacking her young children, which is despicable and should be totally off bounds. But the left views the court as central to their agenda for America. And it really goes back to the 1960s when leftists discovered and seized upon the court as a way to implement their agenda that the American people wouldn't vote for. They found it was hard to actually win elections on their ideas because their ideas are bad. And it was much easier to get 5 unelected lawyers, philosopher kings in black robes, to decree leftist policy outcomes. And starting from the 60s, accelerating into the 70s, it got worse and worse and worse. And one of the reasons the left is losing their minds right now with this vacancy is that they feel their hammerlock on the court is in danger of slipping away. And it's about power. It's about power to control America without actually having to convince voters. I mean, the hard left views most American voters as ignorant rubes. They think we're too dumb to govern ourselves, and our elitist betters should set the rules for us. And it's that's really what drives, I think, their rage in this context.
And you know, Ted Cruz, this really goes back to the progressive ideology. Woodrow Wilson wrote a lot before he was governor, before he was president, about progressivism, and he said the courts are where the action should be, because exactly, they can get around the population, they can get around the checks and balances, use the courts for revolution. That's exactly what they've been doing. And I just wanted to mention a few things to you and get your response to this. Number one, if the President of the United States had not nominated somebody, he would be the first president in the United States to not nominate somebody in the last year of a first term or a second term. As you well know, 22 presidents before him have done exactly the same thing. 29 nominees have been in virtually exactly the same position as Amy Coney Barrett. And so the Democrats are saying, with Chuck Schumer leading, if the President of the United States doesn't do something that no president has ever done, they're going to destroy the Supreme Court. They're going to try and pack the Supreme Court. They're going to go further. They're going to pack the United States Senate so we have one-party rule for a generation. They're going to destroy the filibuster so they can get the Bernie Sanders, Joe Biden manifesto passed en masse without any opposition. They're talking about eliminating the Electoral College. In other words, they're going to burn down our constitutional system. Isn't that what they're saying?
No, that's exactly right. And the left, they believe in government. They believe in totalitarian control. The left, statists are willing to use force. You want one of the simplest differences between left and right. The left is much more comfortable using force to enforce compliance. So when it comes to, for example, speech, the left wants to censor everyone who disagrees with us. And a lot of people say, well, both sides do it. No, that's not right. You and I aren't calling for Bernie Sanders or AOC to be censored. I'm actually perfectly fine for them to yabber on incessantly. Their ideas are foolish and dangerous. And I think the best way to respond to it is sunlight and more attention. But the left is willing to use force. They're willing on the court. I think the threat of packing the court is very real. I think if they take the majority in the Senate and they win the White House, they will pack the court. I don't think it's a bluff. Joe Biden's trying to hide from it. At the debate, he ran away screaming when asked, but I think that's where the Democratic Party is, and it's about power and it's about enforcing compliance. And I think we need to take that threat very, very seriously.
You know, you talked about the Bork hearings, you talked about the Thomas hearings. There were other hearings for circuit court nominees, the second level of courts. And the man who was in the middle of all this, who basically destroyed the confirmation process, that used to be gentlemanly, based on tradition, as you say, a discussion of ideas, and typically, unless there was some horrific issue in their background or criminality or something, the nominee would go through. The man who led it was Joe Biden, wasn't it? It was Joe Biden. Joe Biden was chairman of that committee often. Joe Biden was the one who would leak to the media all the time. Joe Biden is the guy who graduated near the bottom of his law school, who plagiarized, and so forth and so on. So early on in this process, over the decades that he's been a senator, he's helped lead this effort to undermine the confirmation process, hasn't he?
That's exactly right. You know, Mark, that's one of the things that I trace in my book, One Vote Away, is the last chapter is on judicial nominations. And I trace the history of Supreme Court nominations going back to Dwight D. Eisenhower. And on the Democratic side, they get it right virtually every time. And what I mean by that is virtually 100% of their nominees vote exactly as Democrats would want them to vote in almost every single case. On the Republican side, Republican presidents have been terrible at Supreme Court nominees. We do not even bat 500. Many of the worst judicial activists were Republican appointees. Earl Warren, William Brennan, John Paul Stevens, David Souter, Harry Blackmun, the author of Roe versus Wade, was a Republican nominee. And there's a reason for that. Look, a lot of people are frustrated, and they're like, well, why do we keep getting it wrong? And so I try in the book to analyze, well, what's the difference? When do we get it right? When do we get it wrong? If you look at the justices who stayed faithful to their oath, who stayed faithful to the Constitution, giants like Antonin Scalia, like Clarence Thomas, like Sam Alito, like my former boss, Chief Justice William Rehnquist, every one of them had a similar pattern. Every one of them had served in the executive. Every one of them had long championed conservative principles, constitutional principles, and critically, every one of them had been excoriated in the press. They'd been pounded in the press, and they hadn't wavered. That's actually what I look for the most. Do you have a proven record, and have you been through the fire? On the other hand, where Republicans get it wrong is when they nominate a stealth candidate, when they nominate a candidate who doesn't have a proven record, who's avoided controversy, who hasn't been criticized, but someone says, hey, trust me, they'll be great. And over and over and over again, it turns out to be a disaster when we follow that pattern. And so I think there's a great virtue to nominating people with proven records. Look, I'll give an example. A Mark Levin Supreme Court justice, I have no doubt you would follow the Constitution no matter what. And why do I know that? Because you've endured the fire and you don't give a damn if the New York Times is praising you or not. I also said in my book, I want a Supreme Court justice that doesn't want to go to D.C. cocktail parties, that all of the social pressure on justices is to move to the left. You go to cocktail parties, you're praised. You know, as you know, the former New York Times Supreme Court reporter was a woman named Linda Greenhouse, and there was something referred to as the Greenhouse effect, which is justices like Anthony Kennedy and Sandra Day O'Connor would move left because when they did, Linda Greenhouse would praise them in the pages of the New York Times, and they wanted to be popular at the cocktail parties. They wanted the press to say nice things about them, and it's destructive to the rule of law. We need justices whose allegiance is to the Constitution and not to whatever the New York Times or the Washington Post has to say about them.
It's a great book. One vote away, how a single Supreme Court seat can change history. And ladies and gentlemen, this is one of the major reasons this election is so absolutely crucial. We'll be right back. Welcome back. Senator Cruz, let's get into specifics now. President of the United States nominates an originalist. Somebody wants to follow the Constitution, try and discern what the framers of the Constitution intended. Chuck Schumer wants to pack the court, stack it with radical activists. Their position is, let us impose our personal policy preferences and then try and pretend the Constitution supports our political positions. But this has a real-world effect, doesn't it, on the Second Amendment, on the First Amendment? Give us a few examples.
Sure. Let's start with free speech. Fundamental protection in the Bill of Rights. All of us care about free speech. I have an entire chapter in the book on free speech that focuses on the Citizens United case. Now, most of us have heard of Citizens United, but a lot of folks don't actually know what the case was about. We know that the Democrats hate it, but we don't actually necessarily know the details of the case. That case was about whether we as Americans have the right to criticize politicians. And it concerns, Citizens United is a small nonprofit group that made a movie that was critical of Hillary Clinton. And the Obama Justice Department took the position that they could punish them, that they could fine the group for daring to make a movie that criticized Hillary Clinton. And the case went all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court. And at the Supreme Court, the most chilling moment of the oral argument was Justice Alito Justice Alito asked the Obama Justice Department, said, under your theory of the case, could the federal government ban books? Could you ban books? And the Obama Department of Justice said, yes. Yes, we, the government, could ban books. We could ban and punish booksellers if they dare criticize a politician. Now, if you look at the text of the First Amendment, if you look at 2 centuries of our nation's history protecting free speech, the answer to the question, can the government ban books or ban movies that criticize politicians, should be really easy, which is of course not. Now, thankfully, that ended up being what the court concluded, but it concluded it 5-4. There were 4 justices ready to conclude the government had the power to ban books, to ban movies, and it's a chilling position, and what's even more chilling about it is Hillary Clinton and Joe Biden, they have both explicitly pledged to nominate justices who would vote to overturn Citizens United. And in fact, one of the things I recount in the book is in the wake of Citizens United, Senate Democrats introduced a constitutional amendment to repeal the free speech protections of the First Amendment, to repeal them and replace them with the first version of it would have given the government plenary power to regulate political speech. And plenary power, as you know, is a fancy legal word for blanket power, total power to regulate political speech. Under their proposed new First Amendment, if a little old lady spent $5 to buy a poster board and put a yard sign in her yard that said, vote for Trump or vote for Biden, the federal government could make that a crime and put her in jail for it. And I was the ranking member on the Constitution Subcommittee at the time. The Democrats had the majority. And I led the debate against this proposal to repeal the free speech protections of the First Amendment. We went back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. Ultimately, it was voted on in the Senate floor. Every single Senate Democrat voted to repeal the free speech protections of the First Amendment. That's how radical they are. They want the power to silence you and to punish you if you dare criticize them. And they've got 4 votes for that position. They had 4 votes in Citizens United. If they get 1 more, our free speech rights are in real danger.
And of course, if they pack and stack the court, that's exactly what they'll do. Let's pick another area, the Second Amendment. What was this Heller case all about, and how could that be overturned? All of this is in Ted Cruz's book, I should mention, One Vote Away, How a Single Supreme Court Seat Can Change History. So we're barely touching the tip of the iceberg. I just want you all to know it's right in here. Tell us about Heller, Senator.
So Dick Anthony Heller is a federal police officer living in D.C. who actually carried a gun at work. But under the D.C. gun laws, it was illegal for him to have a gun at home. He could not have an operative firearm. He couldn't have a pistol at all. They were banned. And a long gun, either a shotgun or rifle, under the D.C. laws had to be disassembled or inoperative at all times, no matter what, with 0 exceptions. So that literally, if he had a disassembled shotgun in his closet and someone broke into his house and was about to assault his family, if he assembled the shotgun, he would have committed a criminal offense in D.C. trying to defend his family. So it's crazy laws, but those are the laws the leftists want. Heller filed a lawsuit challenging that and raising the obvious claim that this violated the Second Amendment. The case went up to the U.S. Supreme Court. I was the Solicitor General of Texas at the time. And so I led the states. We brought together 31 states in defense of the right to keep and bear arms. And I argued the companion case to Heller in the D.C. Circuit, the Court of Appeals. The central issue on Heller, it's important to understand, Heller ultimately was 5-4. The position of the dissenters, and Justice Scalia wrote the majority. It was, I think, the finest opinion Justice Scalia ever authored. The 4 dissenters, they didn't argue that some gun control sometimes may be okay. Reasonable minds maybe could differ on that. We could have a discussion about what's the right policy outcome on gun control measures. The position of the dissenters was much more radical. They argued that the Second Amendment protects no individual right whatsoever. that it protects instead what they called a collective right of the militia, which is just a fancy term for a non-existent right. Because if the Second Amendment doesn't protect an individual right, it means the federal government or the state government or the local government can ban all guns, can make it illegal for you or me to own a firearm, can say they will lock you up and put you in jail if you have a gun. And if the Second Amendment doesn't protect an individual right, you and I have no ability to challenge that in court, no defense to the criminal prosecution. It quite literally erases the Second Amendment from the Constitution. It takes away our protection. That was the position of the four dissenters. One additional leftist added to those four, and the Second Amendment goes away. Joe Biden, when he was asked, if you're elected president, are you coming after people's guns? Biden's answer was, bingo. That's what they want to do, and it's not some possibly reasonable minor alteration. It is destroying the right altogether is what their agenda is at the court.
So the public needs to understand, that people viewing this program need to understand, this is just campaign rhetoric. Your Bill of Rights will be under attack. They'll be turned inside out. The power of the central government will be unchecked. They want to ram through legislation. You'll bring lawsuits all the way to the Supreme Court. They'll control the Supreme Court. It'll be a mini legislature, kind of left-wing Democrat Politburo, if you will, because the independence of that court will have been destroyed. This is what they are running on. This is what they are saying. And this is exactly why Joe Biden will not release his list of potential nominees, so we could all discuss exactly what they're going to do to us as individuals, our freedoms, our family, our faith, and our Constitution. The book is One Vote Away: How a Single Supreme Court Seat Can Change History. We'll be right back. We're back with Senator Ted Cruz. The book is One Vote Away: How a Single Supreme Court Seat Can Change History. It's a fantastic book. It's right on topic. We're in the middle of this battle. You can go to Amazon.com and get your copy. It's a smart book. It's an understandable book. Senator Cruz, you've argued cases in front of the Supreme Court. You're a student of the Supreme Court. You clerked for one of the great Chief Justices, William Rehnquist of the Supreme Court. So my question to you is this. You keep hearing the Democrats, particularly Schumer, say things like, if Judge Barrett gets on the court, or any Trump nominee gets on the court, we're going to lose our rights. We're going to lose Obamacare. We're going to lose abortion. We're going to lose this. They go down a whole list of agenda items. They said, we're going to lose all this. Whose job is what when it comes to our federal government, and what are they talking about losing all this?
Well, under the Constitution, policy issues are supposed to be decided in the elected legislatures. That's what we have a Congress for. That's what we have 50 state legislatures for. And so something like Obamacare, listen, Obamacare as a policy, I think has been an absolute disaster. It's made health insurance unaffordable for millions of Americans. But it's interesting. The Democrats have decided their number one talking point against Judge Barrett is if she's confirmed, she's going to be a henchman for Donald Trump to take away health care for pre-existing conditions. And I think the fact that they're focusing on Obamacare and pre-existing conditions shows that they recognize how out of touch they are on every other issue. They don't want to talk about free speech and how they want to take away our First Amendment rights. They don't want to talk about the Second Amendment and how they want to repeal the Second Amendment. They don't want to talk about religious liberty. And they don't even want to talk about Roe versus Wade. They recognize their views on life are extreme. Instead, they want to talk about pre-existing conditions. Now, I don't know how the Supreme Court is going to decide the particular case that is up there about Obamacare, but however the court decides it, Congress can act, and all 100 senators agree that pre-existing conditions should be protected and will be protected. Now, there's a debate about how to do that. There's a debate about what the best means is. I think the best way to do it is with lots of choices, lots of competition, in a way that drives premiums down so that people's health insurance is personal and portable. It goes with you from job to job. That's a policy debate that it shouldn't be 5 judges in robes deciding. It should be people who are elected by the voters making those determinations and weighing the pros and cons. But the Democrats don't want to have to go through that messy problem. They just want the judges to decree it and force it on everyone.
You know, it amazes me. In the real world, deductibles are through the roof. The cost of premiums are through the roof. In many cases, people can't choose doctors, so it's built on a pile of lies, this entire Obamacare. In many states, you have no choice. It's one or no insurance. And the Democrats claim they're for choice. Why do you think, by the way, as a side, the only choice they're for is when it comes to abortion? Otherwise, they want to centralize decision-making, eliminate competition, and impose their will on us. What kind of psychology is that?
That is absolutely right, and I'll give an example. So I've got an entire chapter in the book on school choice, which I think is the most compelling civil rights issue of the 21st century. Now, school choice, I don't think the court should demand school choice. As much as I support it, the right way to pass school choice is through the elected legislatures, either Congress or the state legislatures. But the book chapter talks about the case Zellman versus Simmons-Harris, which was a challenge to the school choice program in Ohio. It went up to the Supreme Court. The court upheld it 5-4. My old boss, Chief Justice Rehnquist, wrote the opinion. But what was stunning is 4 of the justices were prepared to strike that program down and to strike down every school choice program in America. Their position was you couldn't have a penny of taxpayer dollars go in any way to a scholarship for any religious school. Now, that would mean, on that principle, you couldn't get a Pell Grant to go to Notre Dame or to go to Brigham Young. I mean, it's not a principle in the Constitution that kids and parents can't have scholarships. But you want to talk about a sleeper issue that people don't realize. If Joe Biden wins and those 4 votes become 5, they become a majority, the court could and I think would strike down every single school choice program in America and take that opportunity away from low-income African-American kids, low-income Hispanic kids that desperately want a chance to get an education. We ought to leave that to the people, and it shouldn't be judges playing legislators striking down programs like that.
I'm well familiar with that case and the Milwaukee case because the group I used to be president of, Landmark Legal Foundation, was involved in all those school choice cases, and you're exactly right. We'll be right back. Welcome back, America. 1 vote away on the Supreme Court. This is how crucial this election is. If this president doesn't win and we don't hold the Senate, this country's going to change in so many substantive, fundamental ways, you're not going to recognize it anymore. 1 vote away on the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court will be completely transformed outside the constitutional structure. Let me give you some examples and ask Ted about it. They keep talking about eliminating the Electoral College, the pressing mail-in voting. This whole milieu of what they want to do to our voting system, Ted Cruz, what will this do to our country?
Well, for them, it is about power. The Electoral College, if we got rid of the Electoral College, it would mean that many of the red states would essentially be ignored. That if it was simply the popular vote, it would mean that candidates on both sides would devote all of their attention just to big states, to California, to Texas, to New York, and rural states would get ignored, the Midwest would get ignored, smaller states would get ignored. It would be the big cities. It would be New York City and Los Angeles and Houston and Dallas and Chicago, where all of the energy would focus. That's a very different representational model than what the Constitution has. You know, part of the brilliance of the Constitution was to stitch together what were then 13 different states is now 50 different states with different interests, and a whole lot of America would be ignored doing that kind of radical change. For them, it's about one thing. It is about power. It's also why Chuck Schumer, if he takes the majority, will in all likelihood add 2 new states, add the District of Columbia and add Puerto Rico, because the Democrats believe they'd get 4 Democratic senators if they did that. It is about one thing, power, consistently.
And the Senate that you talk about, that it's already been changed, you know, since the early progressive era in the early 1900s, where senators were selected, most of them by state legislatures. Now there's a direct vote. Now they want to pack the Senate. This is the thing. You know, when we conservatives or Republicans, we lose, we get ready and fight another day. We try and convince the electorate, okay, we have better candidates, we have better arguments. We're defending the constitutional structure, even in cases where it advantages our opponents.
Yep.
These folks don't really like the Constitution that much when they're pushing the 1619 Project, when they're dismissing the founders as a bunch of slaveholders. And so isn't it a little schizophrenic here when the Democrats talk about, or the left talks about and waves around the Constitution, but on the other hand is burning it?
Yeah, look, they don't believe in democracy. And they don't trust the voters. I've got an entire chapter in the book on democracy and elections, and it talks about Bush versus Gore. In 2000, I was part of the legal team representing George W. Bush. So I was a young lawyer in Austin, Texas, on the George W. Bush campaign. That's actually where Heidi and I met. We were in cubicles just down the hall from each other. And if you look at what happened in Bush versus Gore, on election night, George W. Bush won. They counted the votes. They declared him the winner. But then the election was close, and Al Gore sent in an army of lawyers in Florida to challenge the election. And so I was in Tallahassee. I was on the ground for that chaos that was that recount. And I still remember, I recount in the book how we had, in the war room, we had a whiteboard on the wall. And there were 7 simultaneous lawsuits, any one of which could upend the presidency of the United States. And we went to the U.S. Supreme Court twice. The first time we went to the Supreme Court, we won unanimously, 9-0. The Supreme Court said the Florida Supreme Court got it wrong. Florida Supreme Court was a partisan Democratic court, and the U.S. Supreme Court said they got it wrong. They vacated their decision and sent it back. The second time we went to the Supreme Court, on the critical issue of the remedy, the court ruled for us 5-4. And what the court concluded is they said, look, the ballots have been counted 4 times. Bush has won all 4 times. Enough is enough. You can't just keep counting and counting and counting and counting until you reverse the results. It's over. We have a winner. That took 36 days. 36 days. The country didn't know who the president was. The world didn't know who the president was. And it was utter chaos. And I think that battle is highly relevant right now today for this election in 2020, because if Joe Biden doesn't win on election day, they're going to do the same thing. They're going to challenge this election. And it may not just be one state, Florida. They may do it in 3, 4, 5 states simultaneously. And it's all about saying, the voters don't get to decide. We want judges deciding, and we're going to keep fighting until the judges decree we win. It's about power at the end of the day. And we're one vote away from the ability of the voters to make the choice, democracy being taken away.
And the interesting thing is Ted Cruz here and in some of the other instances, they wrap themselves in the will of the people when they go to the courts to impose their will. We'll be right back. Welcome back. We're talking to Senator Ted Cruz. The book is One Vote Away, How a Single Supreme Court Seat Can Change History. Fantastic book. Incredibly important. Senator Cruz, you have been on the president's short list as a potential Supreme Court nominee, and you have said each time, no, I kind of like what I'm doing. Tell us about that.
Well, that's right. It's one of the things I talk about in the book is the conversations I've had with the president, starting in November 2016, right after he was elected, where I spent about 4.5 hours with him in Trump Tower, and he talked with me very, very seriously about the Justice Scalia seat that went to Neil Gorsuch. And I told him then, I said, I revere the court, but I don't want to be a judge. And the reason is, a principled judge stays out of political and policy fights. And if I were ever a judge, I would do that. I don't want to stay out of those fights. And in fact, you look at the fight we're having right now to confirm Judge Barrett. That's exactly why I want to stay in the fight, because we need leaders in the elected realm, in the Senate, to lead the fight, to stand up for conservative principles. And I hope to be part of confirming 2, 3, 4, 5 great principled constitutionalist justices I just don't particularly want me to be one of them.
And God forbid, if Joe Biden is elected president of the United States, do you agree with me that he'll bring that same mentality, which is quite vicious, quite superficial, and extraordinarily political, to the selection of Supreme Court justices, which will be rammed through a new increased majority in the United States Senate?
Look, I think that's exactly right. The justices Joe Biden would put on would be radicals. They'd take away free speech. They'd take away the Second Amendment. Religious liberty, which is something all of us care deeply about. There has been a four-justice radical left minority on the Supreme Court that is ready to order God taken out of the public square. One of the cases that I litigated at the Supreme Court was defending the Texas Ten Commandments monument that stands on the state capitol ground. We won 5-4. We preserved the monument, but there were four justices ready to say, send in the bulldozers, tear it down. There are four justices ready to say, bring in the sandblasters and take the crosses and stars of David off of the tombstones in Arlington Cemetery. And there are four justices ready to go after Hobby Lobby, ready to go after the Little Sisters of the Poor, a Catholic convent of nuns that the Obama administration wanted to fine and punish because they wanted to force them to pay for abortion-inducing drugs and others. We're one justice away from the government persecuting you for your faith, and it is dangerous, it is radical. And by the way, Joe Biden has pledged, if he's elected, he's going back after the Little Sisters of the Poor. And it's the beauty of the Constitution. It protects all of us. It doesn't give government the power to do that.
Senator, I want to thank you for banging the pots and pans and underscoring this incredibly important issue, that this is on the table in this election. One vote away, and he's not kidding, how a single Supreme Court seat can change history. Senator Ted Cruz, we very much appreciate having you, sir.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you for all you do.
And God bless you.